And now in other news, the White House issued a statement Wednesday saying that the United States was committed to coordinating with Israel on efforts to prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. Meanwhile, Israel launching a massive drill on Wednesday, sending hundreds of aircraft to bases in Cyprus, simulating striking enemy targets, including in Iran. Joining us now to discuss the latest developments is Professor Chuck Freilich, former Deputy National Security Advisor in Israel and Professor for Political Science at both Columbia and Tel Aviv University. Thank you for joining us. So first of all, the talks with Iran have largely stalled. The U.S. National Security Advisor and the Israeli National Security Advisor meeting at the White House to discuss Iran. I mean, what is the significance of this meeting now during this crucial time?
Well, I imagine we're pretty much getting down to the final opportunity for a nuclear deal at this point, at least. And it really increasingly looks like there won't be a deal. So I would imagine, by the way, I should qualify that. Very often negotiations, just when they looked like they're about to come apart, the very worst moment, that's when the breakthrough happens. But it doesn't look like that's the case now. And I would imagine that what Mr. Sullivan and Mr. Khulata are talking about is Plan B. What do we do if there isn't a deal? And Israel, of course, has been pressing the U.S. for a while to reimpose biting sanctions. They're there on the books still since the Trump era and beforehand, but the Biden administration has not been applying them as stringently as its predecessor. And the other thing is for the U.S. to at least have the appearance of a credible military option, which it doesn't have today. Neither does Israel at this point, but both sides have to present a credible option. And the hope is that these two forms of pressure will produce some moderation on Iran's part, maybe in the form of delaying a potential breakout and maybe in encouraging them to come back to a deal at some point.
Now, you mentioned that the nuclear deal unlikely to happen. Where does it stand as of today? What is holding Iran and the United States and Europe back from signing a deal? What's the major obstacle today?
Well, I think what's happened at this point is that it's the Iranians who do not appear to want a deal. Most of the issues seem to have been worked out. And in the end, the Iranians came up with a last demand, which they may have raised actually because they thought it was a spoiler, the demand that the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps, or the Revolutionary Guards for short, that they be removed from the American terrorist list. And I think the administration was probably even willing to accept that at one point, if they had thought that that was really the last obstacle. But when they found out that this was probably a ploy on Iran's part and that they didn't really want to lead to a deal, then the U.S. decided to stand firm on this. I think what we've seen is the change in Iran, in the government, the rise of the Raisi government, a very, very hardline government. And what's happened in the last year or so is that from a position where Iran was in really difficult straits because of the American sanctions, they've basically learned to live with them. They've developed what they call a resistance economy. In other words, they're producing a lot of what they can't import anymore on their own. It's not as good, but they have knockoff products. China has stepped up to the plate to a certain extent, replacing trade with the rest of the outside world. And the Iranian economy, especially because of the rise in oil prices, isn't doing that badly at the moment. So I think that they believe that they can withstand American pressure for a long time, and they don't want to go back to the old deal. They probably won't want to go back to or go to a new and what we would consider better deal.
Now, you talked about Plan B. Israel engaging in a major military drill same day as the White House puts out the statement. I mean, is there any relation? Is this supposed to send a message to Iran that we're ready with Plan B?
Well, it would be nice if we could send that message, but I think the truth is that everybody knows we're not ready. The U.S. does not have a credible military option at this point. That's not to say that the U.S. couldn't develop one rather quickly if it wanted to, but it doesn't, and it's been a long time, probably close to a decade since the U.S. had a credible military option. Now, from all the public reports we know, including, for example, public statements just a few months ago by former Prime Minister Barak and former Prime Minister Olmert separately. They each came out with a statement saying that Israel does not have the military capability to do more than achieve a short-term delay in the Iranian program. And I think that's pretty much the majority view of all observers. So when we talk about Plan B, it's really a variety of things. It's first of all, renewing viable military options. And by the way, that's problematic to begin with, because even if you have the option, what can you really achieve? The Iranians already have the know-how. So even if you can totally destroy the program, they can reconstitute it rather quickly, a couple of years. But rebuilding the military options, it's covert operations, and there are constant reports in the press about various cyber and mostly kinetic attacks attributed to Israel. It's about building the relationship with the Sunni states, mostly the Gulf states that Israel is doing today, together with the United States. And that may be one of the primary issues that is being discussed in Washington today in preparation for President Biden's upcoming visit. It's about reinstating the sanctions. It's about putting together a package of sources of pressure that in the end are designed to try and get Iran to agree to a stronger and longer deal. And good luck to all of us.
Good luck to all of us indeed. Professor Chuck Freilich, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you.
ILTV Plus, your news from Israel and more 24/7. Start your free trial today. Subscribe at iltv.tv and watch from any device.